So you can see here, around us we have a lot of my team, not only professional archaeologists, but veterans who are interested in this history and interested in participating with us in order to help be the litmus test for history here. Archaeologists do the dirty work of ground truthing history, and that's exactly what I'm honored to be able to share with you tonight is our 4-year project supported by Fort Ligonier and put up with by my wife and supported by my institution to go after such interesting information, right? To move the ball forward, to not be satisfied with that history is static, because it certainly is not. So we've dubbed this effort the Friendly Fire Incident Expedition, and we've been here, this is our 4th year now. We come out here one summer week in July, the hottest week, or one of the hottest weeks, just to prove that we're all very tough and interested and gonna push through anything Mother Nature has to throw at us. But we've been finding the material culture that helps us say, we've found this battlefield. And you can't really protect something unless you know where it is. So this is the first step in locating it, protecting it, and then interpreting it. And we are absolutely honored to be part of this process. So we got together with this idea that we could bring military veterans here to Fort Ligonier during my archaeological projects, which were originally designed for undergraduate students. And I quickly realized that military veterans are very adept to being outside, not complaining about the heat and the bugs. And I kind of found a new constituency here in the fact that they're not only interested in the history and really want to be here and on the team and help us move the ball forward, but they're all very tough and very diligent in this search. And that's what it takes to find the little bits and pieces of clues that we can knit together and actually say to you that we've found the Friendly Fire Incident battlefield. So we've been out here a few years. The first year we found 169 artifacts. This was through metal detection survey, and that's kind of the thrust of battlefield archaeology. That's how you quickly locate artifacts that belong to the time period. The second year we came out here, we found 63 artifacts. We found less artifacts, but that's because we were engaging with the fact that there might be burials on the site as well. So we brought in archaeological canine cadaver dogs to help us in our search for not only the battlefield, but for the results of the battlefield, the potential for hallowed ground in our project area. So that prompted us to have a two-pronged approach to this site: find and define the battlefield and the battle actions that day, and then also do our due diligence to see if we could find that hallowed ground. Not in an effort to dislodge them from their resting place, but just to memorialize this spot where Virginians lost their lives. So we returned again, and we found 93 artifacts last year. Right? We keep building up our understanding of this project area through collecting artifacts, doing what Ranger Dave is doing here in this image, metal detecting. And it's not only metal detecting, but it's also mapping the artifacts and also studying them and interpreting them and doing some science on them. It's allowed us to have the confidence to say, to tell you, to tell the historians and other archaeologists and just posterity in general, that we have a pretty good idea of where the Friendly Fire Incident occurred. And you have to do that by using history, but like I said, then you have to switch to ground truthing, and that's what archaeology does. Now, we know that this happened. We have the history, we have the words written by Washington himself in his quarterly book the evening after Friendly Fire Incident occurred, November 12, 1758. He writes, "To march tomorrow morning at reveille, beating to the ground where the skirmish was this evening, and to carry a proportion of spades in order to enter the dead bodies." Now, I'm going to say confidently that this has been found. this location has been found, that despite the fact that this fell into clouded history, that we only have some aspects of this that come to us from the written record, we need to find the rest of it in the ground and square that with the history. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we did that and show you some of the data and let you judge for yourself whether it's compelling. So the history tells us that Mercer and his 2nd Virginia Regiment went out to meet the French and Native American attackers that day. That it wasn't going to be a repeat of a month prior when they got close to this fort up here and actually did some severe damage, especially with running off livestock and just harassing this fort in general. So at this point, we know, the history tells us that Mercer was alerted to this and was actually sent out, were out there already and sprung a trap, an ambush for this raiding party. So what we do is we take the history and we put the battle map together. And by the way, this is done with lots of subject experts. This is certainly not a one-man show. It's an extremely large team of experts that we put together. Even to think that we had the confidence to dig at this site, we go all the way back to Charlie Fagan's research and pinpointing the locations, right? And then we brought in more and more subject matter experts to the point where we could have this story knit together from everything that they knew from their tidbits and leads, put it together and then say, let's make an effort to see if we can ground truth this. Can we test this? Can we find out if this location is indeed the location of the battlefield? So you can see here, this is what we've put together before going into the field, or as we were in the field maybe for 1 year, we started to put this battlefield map together, showing Mercer's group coming along from the Forbes Road, from Fort at Loyalhanna, in this direction towards the French contingent, and likely this is the location where some or all or most of that battle occurred, that initial contact between Mercer's group that was heard back here at the fort, that Washington was responding to and wanting to go out and assist with another 500 men. If we move this along, the story we put together, or the clues that we could gather, were that Mercer had won that ground. He had won the advantageous ground and pushed the French and the Native American allies off of that ground. And you can see they're heading back the Forbes Road up to the upper left-hand corner of this map. As that's happening, Washington is about to enter the battlefield, unbeknownst to Mercer, the direction that he's coming. And what that probably did was precipitated a clash between friendly soldiers, fratricide. It resulted in the killing of many of their brothers in arms, the 1st and 2nd Virginia Regiment. What we then had to find or prove was that, yes, we can see the Forbes Road archaeologically, yes, we can see that initial engagement, and then yes, we can see the second engagement, which was indeed the friendly fire, sort of a perpendicular sort of action and exchange to the original battle. So that's what we wanted to prove archaeologically. After spending 3 years on the site, and not 3 years, but 3 weeks, really. We come out here the 2nd week of July, put this together as best we can, and then we spend months and months crunching data, arguing about spatial distributions and maps and artifacts. And then we come back out again and fill in more of the map. And you can see there that the first year where we were out there in 2022, the yellow lines stick to the area along the Forbes Road, but also we were getting out into the slopes surrounding the area and also across this little drainage divide. We were finding lots of good evidence that what we were finding is not just the Forbes Road, but there's a battle along the Forbes Road. And in 2024, we even wanted to sleuth out even more of that. So we headed up to the north end of the field and we kept following our hunches that Washington came from the north end of the field, following a 2-mile run onto the battlefield, and really precipitated this confusion We know that they were depleted in their uniforms and kits, and that everybody that day was hard to discern from the enemy. So it's not too difficult to imagine how this could happen. It's foggy, it's late in the day, visibility is low, anxiety is high, security is out. They might have even been processing those prisoners, which they were about to get really good intelligence from, actionable intelligence from. So again, what we're trying to do here is build this up using the techniques of battlefield archaeology. These are laid out in the National Park Service Battlefield Manual, for instance, and we utilize those techniques and methods as well as the latest technologies that are available to us, not only metal detectors, but also geophysical techniques like ground penetrating radar, and even isotopic analyses. But the battlefield resources that we could potentially find and document here are the cultural features, the natural features, and the artifacts. In this case, some battles are long enough that you have entrenchments or features dug into the ground, and those would be military engineering features. We don't have those on this site, so this is a very ephemeral signature. It's hard to flesh out, and it doesn't have any anchor points like structures or palisade walls. So it's challenging, but you look at the terrain just like our military veterans are trained to look at landscapes. If you're looking for advantageous ground, looking for bottlenecks, looking for routes of egress from a battlefield, these are all things that are second nature to military veterans because it's part of their training. But in the battlefield manual, we also are trained to document these things and keep track of them because they are the skeleton around the constellation of artifacts which actually tell us what happened. We can learn more from these sites through the archaeology. The cultural feature here that led us to this site is the Forbes Road. Right? It stretches all the way from Carlisle out to Fort Duquesne. We have a definite section running through our project area, so that's one good thing. It's in our favor for saying, this is very likely the battlefield because we know that this happened along the Forbes Road. So this gives us our first clue as to its location. Then we look at these natural features in our project area. We have high sloping ground where the Forbes Road heads off to the west. We have a spring and a marsh, a bench, kind of like high ground above a floodplain, and 2 Mile Run, which is a stream that runs down to and joins with the Loyalhanna, not too far from this point. We take all that and we start to build a military battlefield map where we have defined not only where there's areas where there's key terrain, but bottlenecks, concealment, cover. In this case, we're trying to really pinpoint this location, showing Mercer's point of entry, Washington's point of entry, and the French and Native American egress. So we really believe that we have the core area where not only the friendly fire site happened, but again, where a lot of, or most of, or much of Mercer's initial contact occurred with the French and Native American raiding party. Now, some of the artifacts that jump out at me, I figured I would share with you here, because when people ask me, how do you know that this is the site? And we don't even talk about the battlefield lead yet, but we just talk about, the copper items, for instance. Down there in the bottom right hand, you see a watch key, which we recovered in 2022. It's a very delicate, still intact, beautiful embossed item. It's decorated with a lion on one side and a fleur-de-lis on the other side, which had us all thinking, wow, could this be the French watch key that the commander might have been using as they were keeping an eye on the fort? Were the French using this spot again as a bivouac or a listening post to attack the fort, given their successes 1 month prior? So that really excited us. But other things we found that year were a shoe buckle chap, there you can see, and then up in the upper left-hand corner, a ramrod guide to a brown bess. And the two pieces that really are compelling to me are these two tiny buckles that you see, one in the north end of the map there and one a little bit closer to to the marsh. And those, I believe, are sock garter buckles. There's some examples of those here in the house. But these are very ornate, dainty, sand-cast artifacts that scream Virginian soldiers. And the reason I say that is because when we dive into the material culture and look at different things and sources online, people that know this material culture typically say that these kind of small decorated buckles are Virginian. They're coming out of Virginia. So again, this is kind of the circumstantial evidence that helps us be more confident in saying, wow, for an archaeologist, the spatial information is the most important. Mapping these things is the most important thing we can do, because then we can argue about clusters, battle lines, drop balls, shot balls, even interments. But you have to map these things accurately. Other things that tell the story here, the lead artifacts are tantamount to a battlefield, as you might guess. You can see them spread all over the site here. There's a big area in the middle that's blank under that broccoli-like vegetation, and that's because we weren't able to get into that area until this year. When we arrived on site on Monday, I was kind of scratching my head wondering how we were going to open up new ground for the veterans who are eager to find more artifacts. And then we see this truck pull up with a skid steer and a grubber on it, and they went to work for about, and Tom brought his guys in for about an hour, or a day and a half, and they opened up a lot more space for us, especially along this area that we know is the Forbes Road, but also other little areas that we've gotten a glimpse of, but we just wanted to get further in there. So with metal detecting, you have to be able to swing the metal detector very close to the ground without hitting anything, or it kind of wrecks the signal and it inhibits your ability to locate artifacts. So we're very appreciative that we got extra space this year to test, and it's paying off. We've mapped more buttons than lead this year, which is fun. The buttons tell a specific story, but the lead is pretty interesting here. If we look at the condition of all of this battlefield lead, you can see that not all of it is classified as a projectile. Some of these are funny shapes, and we classify some of this stuff as casting waste, lead sprue and spill from making bullets. So not all of this was necessarily fired in anger or dropped on a battlefield during that action that day, but a lot of it was. These are the lead items that we found last year that I didn't have time to incorporate into that other graphic. So every time we go out there, we spend a week there and we come back with a bag of artifacts that helps fill in this battle that wasn't accurately recorded, or that nobody really wanted to necessarily remember every detail, or they somehow didn't get recorded. We can actually go back into the landscape and pick those items out and interpret them. Here's some of that material that I said was sprue and spill, kind of the waste materials from making ammunition. So already archaeologists start to think, well, there was a battle here, a road here, but there was also potentially camps here. We know that the forces here at this fort had so much livestock that they had to move almost 10 miles or further out from this point, looking for forage, looking for grass. So only 2 miles away, we have a beautiful meadow, right, that would have been known to the grass guard and to the British here at the fort, but also probably was known by the French and their Native American allies, because they were always keeping an eye on what was going on here at Ligonier. So my colleague at Juniata College, Ryan Mather, is a geochemist. And we started working first on copper together, but we started to put our heads together on lead. We were wanting to figure out where the lead sources were in colonial America, right? To try to get a little bit more out of our battlefield assemblage. Yes, you can get the condition of lead balls. Yes, you can get the calibers and their locations, but we were looking for another independent line of evidence that would help slam dunk this. Like, we were trying to prove as archaeologists to historians that we have a battlefield. So we were challenged to come up with as many independent lines of evidence as we could that would all point to and agree with that fact that this is the battlefield. So you can see that we have 3 dots on the map here because that's the 3 sources that we detected in the 57 specimens that we tested from the friendly fire incident battlefield. And we also compared those to about 32 that we collected across the road here that might have been part of the Battle of Loyohana. And I also have a battlefield assemblage from the Battle of Sidling Hill back in Huntingdon County, which happened in 1756. All that is to say that we are kind of breaking new ground with respect to the isotopic analysis of lead ammunition from the colonial period. And from the colonial era, it's more meaningful than, say, in the 19th century, because those mines were already figured out then, the landscape changed. But in this case, we have the French being supplied by North American sources in Missouri, which the mines were opened up there as early as 1720s, and also in the St. Lawrence region of Canada. And he can recognize these sources because the isotopes kind of inform us of the time of formation of these leads. So they're very different to a geochemist. To me, they all look like lead, right? But when they look at the numbers, they see very definite differences in their isotopic signatures. He calls it an isotopic fingerprint, if you will. So we were working on that. We were looking at Revolutionary War mine at Fort Roberdeau, trying to produce a publication that would give the signature of that lead. And then we started thinking, hey, we should find out what all of these signatures of battlefield lead are, because maybe some of them were actually supplied by Roberdeau. But that opened up this can of worms where we were realizing that we had lead from Europe, Canada, and Missouri on our battlefields. Throwing these on the plot for the friendly fire site, 55 or 57 of these artifacts, you can see some are red, some are blue, and some are yellow. Those are the ranges for the isotopic signatures of those mineral deposits that would produce those leads. And you can see that the center block there, the European stuff, all hangs together. It's all clustered together. And we're interpreting those pieces as Virginians and folks here at the fort. They probably would have been supplied by European lead. There's not a lot of variability in that lead, so it sticks together in a tight block. The red represents Missouri lead, but the true Missouri signal is that large red square, and you can see that we have a lot of artifacts that are out of that square, closer to the center point, which is where the European lead is. And what that means is, and what that meant to him, what he told me that means, is that you've got blending of these leads. You've got people picking up different scraps of lead, melting them together, and then changing their isotopic signature, actually pulling it closer to the European side of the spectrum. And the same thing can happen with the Canadian. The Canadian block is supposed to be very delimited there, but we see that one piece has a little bit of European signal worked into it. And many of these pieces are those sprue and spill, right? So lead's a malleable material. You heat it up, you melt it down, you get what you want, you trim off some other pieces, and then you're gonna put those back into your crucible at some other point. So those are gonna blend and mix and change the signatures of these leads. So we thought, ooh, we're onto something here, and this will probably at least add another dimension to our forensics of the battlefield. So for the Canadian lead then, you can see we only have 3 little pieces, and we can see exactly where they are on the site, where we recovered them. Here you can see all the Missouri lead kind of dispersed all over that landscape. Some along the road, but a lot of it up on the hills and around the marsh. And not all of these pieces, again, are bullets. A lot of them are spill and sprue, and they suggest that maybe people were hanging out on that landscape in a dispersed kind of manner, maybe camping long enough to have a fire, casting more bullets and ammunition, getting ready for an attack, perhaps. This is the European lead. So you can see that these cluster out in different areas. What this says to archaeologists, or for battlefield archaeologists, is that we've got patterning here that we can discern. This adds another dimension to that patterning that we just saw. It was kind of flat when we didn't know where the sources were, but we still know caliber condition, life history of these pieces of lead. Adding this was, to us, it was kind of a eureka moment when we were able to say, okay, I think we can identify these battlefields because of this mix of sources. So putting it all back together, you can see the battlefield actions we can start to have the fun parts of like arguing about what the data means, right? What this information means as far as source versus caliber versus location on the battlefield. So what we learned from all of that, isotopic science is we started to break into an understanding of colonial supply lines. We can, at the local scale, see troop positions, and specifically we can see Washington and the 1st Virginia Regiment's entry onto the battlefield and the firing position, and a change in direction in Mercer's fire, going from north-south to going from east-west, moving to the north, where Washington men came into the battlefield. But we didn't stop there. Again, we have a bunch of folks who are hard to convince that this is on private property. It's not in a national park. It's not public land. So the bar is even higher, really, to prove that what we have here is something of significance, archaeological significance. So we brought in a cadaver dog expert in 2023. This isn't a search and rescue dog, although these dogs could do that. They are archaeological canines, meaning they're looking for human remains that could be hundreds of years old, and in some cases even thousands of years old. I hear they have good luck with cadaver dogs in Europe looking for Bronze Age burials. So I trust this technique to get us back 260 plus years ago, really. So what we did was we had these dogs on site. One dog came one day, totally different dog came the following day, and they were given free rein to run around the site, figure out where they could find the smell of humans, and that's their job. They ignore everything else. After spending their time there surveying, there were 7 dog hits, meaning that they were interested in 7 spots. They got the sense that there was essence of human at 7 different spots, and we took that information and plotted it on our map. Then we wanted to test that even further. We brought in a graduate student from IUP to do some ground penetrating radar and some magnetometer surveys. But the deal was that we wanted them to do it within this 40-meter square where we knew the dog hits were bracketed. We knew that, okay, there's 7 clues within this box. Now, we're not going to show you guys where this is, but come in and do ground penetrating radar. So we wanted a blind test there to see if we could line up any of these dog hits with anything that they found in the ground penetrating radar or even in the mag data. So you can see when we put this on the map, it looks like this. You can see that gray box is the data that they collected. In that data was something pretty interesting. We found the definitive things that we found were the foundation walls for an old barn that's no longer there. And after we found them and started looking at the landscape, we're like, oh yeah, you can tell there was an old barn here. And that was interesting to us because we had a little bit of information from oral tradition that suggested that one of the landowners, when she was very young, was told by her relatives, hey, don't drink any water from the springs there above the marsh on site because there's dead bodies in the ground, right? So when we heard that, we all perked up, and even everybody was like, that's good information to consider. And this year especially, I kind of stayed away from that barn because I knew it would be archaeologically messy. Like, I'm not here to find a barn, I'm here to find a battlefield and potentially a grave. But the fact that we have that oral tradition that potentially these folks who, when they were later in the 1700s building their farmstead, may have encountered this grave, may have dislodged the friendly fire incident mass grave. This is making a lot more sense now because the dog hits are very tight. They're right around the barn, and then the rest of them are kind of downslope in a fan-like pattern, right? And that says to us that that's downslope movement. And even when the cadaver dog expert was there, he was saying, yes, that the essence of human can leak down slope from a point, especially if a grave's been disturbed at some point. So that got us thinking about, we've been finding buttons all over the site, here and there, as you might expect on a battlefield. But in this particular site, there's also an area that's very hot with buttons and buckles. We actually found a very nice shoe buckle today, right near this location. So the narrative that's coming together now for us, or that I'm going to stand by, is that this barn did indeed, if it didn't take out the entire burial, it took out a lot of the burial that was the Virginians put there sort of in a safe place in deep soil, or at least in that area above the marsh. We think that they were dislodged. And when you build a bank barn, you take soil out of a large area and you throw it up on the slope to make a nice flat area for your upper deck, upper level of the barn. And we're really, I'm convinced that the reason we have so many buttons and buckles up in that area right above the barn and dog hits on and below the barn is because that's where these burials were. So that's not totally conclusive, right? And we might not ever find any more human remains other than what those dogs have kind of pointed us towards. But I believe it's enough to square with the historic record that we have here, and is a great working hypothesis. So to start to sum this up, the historical proof is already there. We have his primary documents, we have recollections, some from Washington himself, and we have oral traditions about the landscape. The archaeological proof is what we're responsible for. That's the 18th century artifacts that we're finding and their spatial distribution. Pretty hard to argue with once we build up this volume of artifacts on this landscape. The isotopic signatures, we feel, help push us over the top with understanding the battlefield lead. The canine responses, I certainly put a lot of stock in their responses and in their ability to help pinpoint the location of the graves. And then the collection testimony, where we've heard that folks around the area that are very familiar with this neck of the woods hadn't really ever encountered an area that produced that much artifactual material dated to the 18th century. All that put together, I'm confident that we've got a friendly fire site. Now, the work's not done. Once you find a site, you want to further define this. And like I said, if you don't know where it is, you can't protect it, you can't interpret it. So we're now into the stages, hopefully, of protecting and interpreting this extremely significant site. And for archaeologists and historic preservation folks, the National Register criteria, I believe there's 4 of them. I believe 3 of them are met with this site. I would argue that we could write this up to suit all of these. Criteria A is associated with a significant event. Obviously, the events that were recorded here, November 12, 1758 at Fort Ligonier. But criteria B, associated with a significant person. It doesn't get any more significant than George Washington in the United States. And then criteria D there, that's the bone thrown to the archaeologist. My mentors always say, this is that the site might be able to yield more information. It's pertinent to history. We might learn more about it from what lies beneath the soil. And moving forward with this, I believe we could argue and successfully argue all 3 of these levels of significance for this site. So to get ready to close this up, I just want to say that this is not a one-person show. This is the result of a lot of people coming together, cooperating, being interested in and having a passion for this history. I'm sure I've left some people out of here because quite frankly, my head was spinning with how much help we had from the student crews this year. But I'm very thankful because even though I'm the fall guy for this, this started with Charlie Fagan saying, I think this is the spot, right? And then the folks at Fort Ligonier trusting me and us to try to define that and actually make that happen. So I'll leave you with, we're not here to tear down here to tear down any George Washington hero, the hero mythology stance, right? But what we're uncovering here is the younger Washington, the inexperienced, the one who's going to learn some hard knocks, lessons through mistakes and persevering, and then carrying that with him the rest of his life as he becomes a leader of men and leader of the nation. So we are just absolutely honored to be able to be part of this and to contribute to history, to contribute to our understanding of history, and to kind of move the ball forward. So with that, I would like to thank you all for your interest, and we'd be happy to take some questions.
You are dismissed, sir. You have been here for a long time this evening, but you have the stamina to last 10 more minutes so that we can open up for questions and answers to our experts. So I would ask you, while the furniture is being rearranged, to think on any questions that you may have, and to please select an individual to aim your question at, and then to pose your question. What I will ask you, with your grace and understanding, is that you do not stand up and make a statement or tell us about your Aunt Tilly, but indeed to ask a question. And also joining this august group of individuals, the Director of Education at Fort Ligonier, Matt Galt, will be here if by any chance you have some questions from that particular angle, representing the fort. And
he is also the IT department